Hi, I'm Parneet Jaggi, and today we're going to be looking into another literary term, satire. Satire has not only been used as an important literary genre in English literature, but it is also being used as a literary device even now in the present times. So let's look at what is satire. When we formally define satire, it is the use of humor, irony, exaggeration, or ridicule to expose and criticize people's stupidity or vices. Now, why do we use satire? Why is it needed as a literary device, or why do we use it as a complete literary work in a literary genre? Why only satire? Why not an ironical work, or why not just a humorous work? So, now the purpose of satire is actually to bring our attention to certain issues that otherwise may have escaped our notice, otherwise may have been overlooked. And it also advocates for social reforms, like looking at some things' stupidity, some agency's stupidity, or some weakness. We actually advocate that particular problem of society in front of the readers to provide insight into human weaknesses, to amuse readers by bringing powerful figures down a notch, to invite readers to reflect on their own weaknesses and shortcomings. So we see satires not only reflect on the weaknesses and flaws of others, but also on one's own universal or human weakness or shortcoming that we may not actually look into without reading these works. Then, to mock literary or stylistic conventions, the old traditional setups that have already carried on for the past few centuries or decades, we generally tend to overlook. But through a satire, it is to mock those stylistic conventions that have been set up and that now need to be broken or changed. Then, to recast strongly held convictions as harmful and meaningless, to make light of or quell anxiety about unpleasant situations by making them fun. So basically, satire we see is a form of writing which uses the tools of humor, irony, exaggeration, or ridiculing to get into light or to quell or satisfy the anxieties about certain situations which are unpleasant or which evoke curiosity or they are enigmatic. We may not directly address those situations, but through satire we are able to look at those situations in a different light. Now, it has played an important role throughout the history of English literature, and satire has been called the oldest form of social commentary. For many people, the injustices and problems in the society are too big to confront directly, and it is hard to know where we would even start. So, one approach of handling and confronting these problems of society has been to start with a comedy. By laughing at something, we can acknowledge its reality while denying its power over our emotions. Now we have different types of satire. Satire is not just of one kind. We have the juvenile satire, which is the strongest and you can say the bittermost type of satire because it attacks a single target in a vicious way, in a kind of a negative light. And the most common form of the satire is political satire, which actually attacks politicians and pundits and the great diplomats of a nation or of a place. Then we have the Menippean. Now, this satire is somewhat similar in harshness to Jovelin, but it attacks a more general target. So, general means it can be an institution, it can be a setup, it can be a community. For example, we have the religious satire. So, this one religion could be a target, one church could be a target, one community could be a target which attacks sacred figures or religious beliefs. So it is more generalized, a group, community kind of a satire, community kind of a thing being targeted. Then we have Horatian. This type of satire makes fun of things in a more soft or even loving manner. It's cool. So it's usually a form of parody which is intended to provoke the thoughts of people. It intends to make people think about something particular which is not suitable or unpleasant in society. Now, how does satire build itself up? Where does satire stand? Does it stand on its own? No. It does need the help of literary devices to achieve the effect that it wants to. Maybe it is humor, maybe it is sarcasm, maybe it is understatement, oversaying something, exaggerating something. So we'll briefly talk about the devices that it takes the help of while building up. So satire often depends on other literary devices to help it achieve its effect. So the first and foremost device, which is mostly and generally used in all kinds of satires, is verbal irony. And irony refers to the use of words to express something other than their literal meaning. The word that we are using may not literally mean the same, but would in fact imply something else, would target at something else, or hint at something else that we want to say. Now, this type of irony depends on a disconnect between what is said and what is meant, or what is true. So, satirists often use irony to suggest that a speaker is too much of a fool to understand a situation, or worse, a liar. So, this is something that we use to imply something else that we want to say, but in a soft tone, using a very soft literal word which may imply something harsh or unpleasant or unwanted or exactly the opposite. Then we have the tool of anachronism. Now, anachronism is a person or a thing which belongs to a time period other than when we are writing, when the piece is being written, satire is being written. So, something related to another period, another age, another time. Satirists might use anachronism to demonstrate how out of touch a subject is with his or her society. For example, in this age of science and technology, we just talk about lighting a fire, or we talk about moving out on carts, bullock carts and all that, and we think of a civilization without roads. So it goes out to a time which does not match with our own time. Then we have a device called parody, and parody is the imitation of a literary style for humorous effects. So normally, when the authors write satires, they use parody to attack the literary conventions and the traditional forms of the rhetoric, often by the use of exaggeration, exaggerating the key elements, key characteristics of this genre until they seem ridiculous or absolutely nonsensical. Then we have the understatement. Understatement is like when you say something lesser than what you want to convey. It is downplaying something's size, significance, or quality. Now, this actually device, like irony, can be used to portray a speaker as foolish. For example, a speaker is saying something which actually should have a lofty or a big meaning or a big use of language, but he is using very simple or lesser words to just give the impression that he is foolish, or he doesn't know the thing, or he is being deceptive. So this is understatement, saying lesser than what is required. Then we have the overstatement. Overstatement is the exaggeration of something which is actually looking like, something which is actually seeming, something's size, significance, or quality. Now, this device can also be used to underscore a person's shaky grasp on the reality of a given situation. For example, if the writer wants to say something and he is over exaggerating his idea or his point, or something is being over exaggerated, which gives the impression that the writer is too shaky, he does not have a grasp on his topic or his point. Then we have the juxtaposition, where we have comparison of two things, in which the author places two things next to each other to highlight the contrast between them. So basically it is a parallel, it is a comparison. And in satirical writing, juxtaposition is especially effective when the combination is far-fetched. It is not expected by a common reader, and it is unexpected. Then malapropism is the humorous and usually unintentional use of a word in the place of a similar sounding one. Now, because these speech errors have the potential to be embarrassing. Now, when you use a word, actually you wanted to use some other word, but because of a slip of tongue or an unintentional mistake, you use another word. So, for example, it is ruler and you say rule, or it is rule, you say ruler. So, kind of confusing that what you want to say could not be conveyed properly, and these are speech errors which make you embarrassed as writers, as speakers. So, satirists may portray people as fools by giving them malapropistic lines. So, when you misspell, mispronounce, or you give an error in your speech, to the audience you sound foolish. So, what the satirical writers used to do was they used to give these malapropistic lines to speakers or characters whom they wanted to look foolish. Now, an important part to understand this concept of satire, in which we see that the whole work is a satire, is we should study the examples of satire. Now, the first satirist that we know of was the Greek playwright Aristophanes. In his plays, he made fun of religious figures, politicians, and philosophers, all with humor and irony. His play, The Clouds, which made fun of the revered philosopher Socrates, was taken so overly serious by the authorities in Athens that it may have contributed to their decision to execute Socrates. Although we came to know that Aristophanes never intended that his writing on Socrates would lead to such drastic or negative results. So we see Aristophanes' writing, the play, actually showed Socrates in a satirical light, so much so that the impression of the society about Socrates changed. Then we have a very popular example of satire. The whole work is satirical, and that is George Orwell's novella Animal Farm. Animal Farm is a dark satire of Soviet communism and Russian Revolution. While the book is not meant to be particularly humorous, its plot definitely ridicules the way in which the Soviet government perverted the original principles of communism. For example, all the characters in this novella are animals, and these animals begin with a basic belief that all animals are equal. But we see as we move in the novel, by the end of the book, they have changed it too. All animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. Now, this is highly humorous, ironical, and satirical. Then again, we have another very popular, famous, and well known work by Jonathan Swift, which is The Gulliver's Travels. Now, this is one of the finest satirical works, the most quoted in English literature, because Swift relentlessly satirizes politics, religion, and Western culture. Now, during his times, there were two rival political parties, the Whigs and the Tories, which dominated the English politics. Similarly, in his work, we see the kingdom of Lilliput is dominated by two parties distinguished by the size of heels of their boots. So, by these small, mundane, tricky, and trivial disputes between the two Lilliputian parties, Jonathan Swift satirizes the minor disputes of the two English parties of the period. Then another fine example of satire that we usually study in our postgraduate classes also is Alexander Pope's The Rape of the Lock. Now, this play is a complete satire in more than one sense. For example, in the third canto of The Rape of the Lock, Pope satirizes the vanity of his fellow Englishmen, describing a very minor incident. Now, this minor incident, if we have read this, The Rape of the Lock, we know that in this, the woman loses a lock of hair, and which has been enacted as an epic event. Suddenly he viewed, in spite of all her art, an earthly lover lurking at her heart, amazed, confused, and he found his power expired. Resigned to fate and with a sigh retired, the peer now spreads the glittering forefix wide. to enclose the lock now joins it to divide. Now, here what Pope is doing is Pope is alluding to a real life episode in which Robert Petre stole a lock of hair from his love interest Arabella. And Pope has successfully satirized the minor event by inflating its importance, increasing its importance to such an epic proportion. He makes reference to sylphs, which are mythological creatures which intervene in moments of crisis. He also overstates the male lover's frustration and also the extent to which fate played a role in the incident. The incident is the minor theft of a single curl, a lock of hair. Then the repetition of like forever, forever in the final line also heightens the humor in the situation. And obviously, the hair will grow back in a short amount of time. But these lines are gentle jabs at his peers' fixation on appearances. So this becomes a very, very rich example of satire. Now, we may quote some more examples of satire in English literature, and some of these important examples are Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, which targeted the pre-Civil War Southern society, in particular its racism. Then we have the American Psycho, which was targeting on consumer capitalist American society of 1980s. Then we've already talked about Orwell's Animal Farm. Then we have The Arms and the Man by G.B. Shaw, George Bernard Shaw, who is targeting the romantic ideals, particularly about love and war. Then we have this novel Catch-22, which is about the US military. And we also have Cervantes' famous work Don Quixote. Among many other things, fictional books about chivalrous heroes that were popular when Cervantes wrote Don Quixote. So these were just some of the examples and the concept of satire in English literature. I hope this will help the students in understanding. But now satire here is a literary genre, but satire can also be used as a tool somewhere in the works of literature, which is always there in most of our works, even in contemporary times, where satire is a small tool used here and there to provoke, to inform, or to ridicule some element of the society or an individual. So this was my brief analysis of the literary term satire. Thank you for now.